Linda, and this is No Frills ASMR. I thought today we could talk about twins. Some of you know I have twins myself, and I've been thinking a little bit lately about DNA and trying to understand it in regards to twins, which I have not quite figured out. But I thought we could just talk about twins. There are two main, well, actually before that, later, I'm thinking I'll use the sand to kind of explain something. And this is, the kinetic sand stuff. But maybe what I should do is go ahead and just take that out now, because it might be a little loud. Just getting it out, We'll get this crinkly plastic part out of the way. That's probably enough. Okay. Alright, so we'll probably use this a little bit later. Hopefully it'll work. I don't know. We'll see. Okay, so there are two, main types of twins. There can be some other ones, but we're just going to talk about the most common twin birth is fraternal, and then the less common is identical. Did I spell fraternal right? I don't know, I think so. So the difference really is that fraternal twins, they're basically genetically like any siblings, any brother, sister, whatever. They have completely separate genetic and DNA profiles. Identical twins share the same genetic makeup, and I'll explain how that happens in a minute. But so fraternal twins can be boy-girl twins. Sometimes they're girl-girl or boy-boy, but they will look different. Just like any sister and brother, they could still look alike, just like how people look alike, but they'll look more like sister and brother. Identical are going to be the same sex, except in extremely rare, but generally they'll be the same sex, and they look alike. But they don't always have to look identical, but they'll look a lot alike, and sometimes they'll look the mirror, like if there's a dimple on the one person's face, it'll be on the other side, so that's like they're looking, other side like this. So it's like they're looking in a mirror twins. Yeah. And I read this statistic that said 1 out of every 250 pregnancies is a twin pregnancy. 1 out of every 250. But then I read a stat that said identical twins are 32 per 1,000 births. And I was like, well, that doesn't add up if it's 32 are identical, which are more rare. So then I said that to my son. He goes, they must mean twin births. So 1 out of every 250 pregnancies is twin. And then 32 out of every 1,000 twin births is identical. So they're not nearly as common as fraternal twins. Does that make sense? I think so. So the fraternal twins are more likely if you are pregnant at age beyond, older than 35 years old. Then you're just more likely to have twins. And if you have a family history of twins on your mother's side, so family history, and I think it's mother's, which I do. My mom's brothers were twins. So on the maternal side. And if you take any kind of fertility medications, what's the word I'm like in vitro, or you're more likely to have twins. What do we call that? Fertility treatments. I don't know if that's the right word. Forgive me if it's not. I was kind of lucky I never had to do that, so I don't know that much about it, to be honest. And then if you have a personal history of having had twins before, or a twin birth, a twin pregnancy, whether it went term, you're more likely to have another twin pregnancy. So personal history, basically. I knew a woman who had triplets, and then 9 years later she had triplets again. 2 sets of triplets. Wow. So personal history. Now identical are different because they're kind of just a fluke, a fluke of nature. They don't really know that any of these things have anything to do with an identical twin birth. Identical twins are just something that happens, I think, from what I understand. And in our family, my kids are identical. And so we like to call them freaks of nature. Just kidding. They're just... But, okay, so let's talk about, I was thinking of doing this with my sand, but maybe it'll be kind of easier at first to just explain it with, with this. So basically, I assume you guys all know the basics, that you have the sperm meets up with the egg, and then you have zygote. Is that what you call it? I think that's right. Okay. So this is basically a little tiny cell, and we're talking microscopic. And then in a regular birth, not a regular, I don't mean to make it sound like anything else is odd, but in a single birth, this cell will start to split and turn into more cells. So then you, all right, let's see, how can we do this? So then you have 2 cells, but they're right next to each other. They start to cling together, and then 3, and then 4, and they bunch up, and that's what will turn into, your embryo. But with a twin birth, these cells split, but they don't cling to each other. They split, and they start splitting more than that separately. This is like by the way, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, I'm just a mom who had children. And this is like kind of my understanding. Okay, so here we have, all right, hold on. Here we have, let's There are a couple different ways this can go. This can happen where about this same time period, this twin birth is still just creating cells over here and has not split into a twin birth yet. This one has started to become a twin, and we have two separate embryos, splitting. Okay. And then over here, in a separate incident, okay, we have on the same cycle 2 eggs, and they both were fertilized. So we have 2 completely separate eggs and 2 completely separate sperm. And that is also a twin birth. So there is the one that splits, or there are 2 separate eggs and 2 separate sperms that fertilized, and they both, clung on and started to be embryos on the same, cycle. Does that make sense? So then these guys, they are basically almost like singleton births. They are but they are separating and just getting like more and more cells going on here. Now what can happen is this, which separated from 2, can separate completely from each other and become like this. So that even though they started with the same egg and sperm, they went to here and then they separated out completely. So now these 2 both have their own, like amniotic sac and everything, and they're completely separate. And they look just like a fraternal twin situation. So that's one course this can take. The other is he's still going along and is still, or she, and is still just at this point they're not gendered anyway. I should never talk about gender. Okay, okay, then this one, if it didn't split like this, it could come down here, and then what happens is way later on, we're talking a while after they've been splitting cells, they are sharing, this is, okay, hold on. This is the placenta, blah, 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 blah. And the placenta is what gives nutrients to the little babies grown in there. And then here are the 2, embryos. And they each have their own little sac it's called an embryonic sac. And it's like a liquid that they can float around in. And the liquid cleans itself and keeps the babies, safe and protected. So these 2 are sharing one placenta, but have 2 separate sacs. These guys come down here, and they have their own placenta and their own sac. So they're completely separate. These guys are sharing a placenta. Now this guy over here has been cooking a little while in here. It sounded terrible. And so they come down, and now by this time there's already an embryonic sac and placenta. And that's when it kind of starts to split more and more. So what you have is 2 embryos sharing the same placenta and the same embryonic sac. And this usually happens when it's a later splitting of the cells. And I've read that this is when it takes about 9 days to start splitting. This one is taking about 5 days to start splitting. And this one is taking about 3 days. So the earlier they start their splitting, the more likely they are to be totally separate like this. And the danger with this one is they share the same embryonic fluid, and that can be kind of tricky because they do poop and stuff while they're in there, and sometimes it can get to be kind of a toxic situation because of them sharing it. So this is really the most dangerous of the twin pregnancies. But if you're having twins and you're unclear if they're identical, one thing the doctor can do is look and see, do they have one placenta? If they only have one placenta, then they are definitely identical. If they only have one amniotic sac, they're identical. But like for me, my twins had totally separate placentas. So the doctor said they are probably not identical. And we have never had them tested in any way to see. But as they always looked alike, but they've become even more identical. And it's funny because I never dressed them alike. I never cut their hair alike. I never, I intentionally tried to make them look different so that I could tell them apart. But occasionally I'll still, in fact, just the other day, my one son was home from Boston. And my other son, who lives here, was standing there, and my one son's looking down writing, and the other one's standing there. And I said to the one standing, I go, you look good. And I see this guy, this is my son who lives near me all the time, and he's like, thanks. And that's when I realized, as soon as he responded, because once he smiles, I can tell. I thought I was talking to the one from Boston, but I was like, oh my gosh. So even though I like to think I can tell them apart, and I can for the most part, but every now and then I can't, and that's how I know they're identical. Because they don't look like brothers, they look identical. But anyway, so this is the basic gist of how it works. So the fraternal twins are completely separate from the beginning, and they're separate all the way down. But the identical can sometimes share the placenta, sometimes, and very rare, share placenta and the amniotic fluids, the sac. And then sometimes they split completely, and they may appear very similar to fraternal twins. So that is, I think, all I have to say about that. But one of the things I have been trying to kind of sort out is the DNA and genetics of this. And from my understanding, if you are born to this sort of twin birth that happened where the split was later, and you shared placenta and the sac, your DNA is very similar. And then this one, it's similar but not as similar. And then this one becomes even less similar DNA. But your genetic makeup is the exact same. While these two are genetically the same as any twin birth, these two are genetically alike. But I get confused about that because I thought DNA makes up your genetics. So how can they say that you're genetically identical, but your DNA is different? But my identical twins, one has a dimple and the other doesn't. And I don't know. And then there's some medical things that have been different that I've always questioned. Well, if they're identical, won't they have the same medical issues? But they haven't always. And it has nothing, it's their genetic medical issues. So, I don't know. Well, actually, I don't know if they're genetic, but they're not from like lifestyle, I guess. Interesting. Anyway, so I'm going to research that some more and get back to you. Let's see. Oops, that was kind of loud. Let's just look at this and see if we can do something fun with it. I'm not sure. So when I was pregnant with my twins, this was back in 2001, they would not do an ultrasound as regularly as I think they do nowadays. In fact, I remember when I was pregnant, well, that can't be right because she's younger. I can't, no, I'm not sure. I guess it was after. But Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes, they had like a ultrasound in their house, and they ultrasound every single day. And I was a little jealous because there are a lot of times when you're pregnant, you can kind of freak yourself out because you don't feel movement or whatever. But anyway, I was pregnant, and sometimes I guess one time there was like no movement. I felt like there was no movement. And I went into the doctor's office and they listened for a heartbeat because that's how they do it back then. And they listened and listened. And then they were like, well, here's one. And then they kind of thought they heard something else. It was all strange. But he basically just sent me home and said, no, everything's fine. All right, so here's our egg. And there's the fertilization. But they don't give you an ultrasound until your second trimester. So I actually think I was like 5 months pregnant. That sounds crazy, but I think that's right. And I remember going in for the ultrasound, and she's like, well, moving it around, and you could see these two like faces, because at that time they were kind of facing each other. And she goes, do you see that? And I was like, oh my God. And then my husband goes, what? And I go, do you see there's two faces? And he goes, or I go, there's two heads. And he goes, are there two bodies? I hope so. But anyway, all right, so here we have our fertilized egg. And then this is a splitting of all the cells in I keep saying regular, in a single birth. And it would just keep splitting. But where's my thingy? Hold on. But with a twin birth, an identical twin birth. Oh, sorry guys. It will split apart like that. And then it'll keep splitting. After that, oh look, it made a little like peace symbol. Peace out, yeah. And then it'll just keep splitting and splitting. That wasn't very exciting, was it? I give up on that. I don't know. Whoops. I don't know how to show that without it being silly. So after I had the twins, in order to tell them apart when they were really little babies, well, first of all, I always dressed one in blue and one in yellow. But my grandma had fraternal twins, but they still look alike when they're babies. So she told me to paint one of their toenails. And I did that right when I got them home from the hospital. I painted one of their toenails so that I could always tell. Make sure I didn't confuse them. But to be honest, my one twin has such a deep dimple, even when he was a baby, that I could always tell, by that dimple. Anyway, I don't know what else about twins. I mean, if you're pregnant with twins, it's very exciting, but I will say it's a lot of work, and it does cost a little more money to have twins. Just everything is doubled. So, if you can try to have a big baby shower and tell everybody you need everything. Actually, just tell them you want diapers, because that's most expensive. I remember when I had mine, I was a waitress, and I worked until the minute I had them, like almost completely. Well, I did have one incident where, I had some problem. I won't go into because I don't want to gross anybody out. But, and they told me to go on bed rest, and I did bed rest. But I had let's see, how old was he? I think he was maybe 13 months old, who I had to take care of because my husband worked. So I was like, bed rest. I put him in a high chair on the floor so I could just click him in on the floor. And we basically did everything on the floor. But I still had to pick him up and take him upstairs to bed and stuff. So bed rest did not last more than... Actually, I didn't do it. I just didn't. Which, I don't know if that was smart. But it turns out it was fine. Everything went fine. I went full term. Oh, I know. What about my pregnancy, though? So, for most of the pregnancy, they were, scooching around face to face. They had separate, to be honest, I don't know about the placenta. I don't know that my doctor ever even told me. I'm not really sure. They just didn't tell you stuff back then. I didn't know to ask until after, because you couldn't Google. But I think for most of the pregnancy, the boys were kind of, that's a baby. I'm not an artist, just so you know. That looks like Donald Trump. Oh my God. Look at that. Anyway, if only I knew how to draw Biden, we could. Okay. So most of the time they were kind of like face to face like this, They do kind of look like little fish, so that's okay. But then right before they were about to be born, the one who, and by this time they're big and they're squished, and when they'd move, their arms would like push my stomach out. Like I'd be waiting on tables and I could see things. Like it looks like I had alien. But anyway, right before they were born, the first one out was breech in a way, like that looks like his leg's broken, but and then like I forget exactly, they showed me an image, but the other one's head was kind of stuck in there. They were like all tangled, and his hand, his arm, they were kind of like tangled up in there somehow. I don't want to say tangled, but so what they do with a breech birth, and breech means their feet or legs are coming out first instead of a normal birth, the head comes out first. But in a breech, their little feet come out first. And with a single birth, sometimes they can, and this is crazy, reach up and flip the baby around and get him come out, or just make it work. But it can be a little more dangerous with a twin birth, and they will still do that sometimes. Like, I was like, no, but he's flipping. I didn't really say that. I would have done whatever they told me was safest. But just because of the way it was all happening, they ended up giving me what's called a C-section, which means they cut your stomach and open you up and take the babies out that way. And that wasn't, most people don't really want to do that, but it's, I just wanted to do whatever was best and safest for the babies. So, and it was fine. It was, everybody's fine. Yeah, so that's more information than you wanted. Probably. So we have to look into the difference between my pen's running out of ink, genetics and DNA. Because, I read that identicals have 100% of the same genes. But if they started separating early and were completely separate like mine are, then their DNA they start to get mutations in the DNA. And those mutations make it different than the genetics. I guess that's how that works. I don't like the word mutation because it sounds bad. But I think it's just what happens, and that's why, I don't know, mutations doesn't that sound like you're going to be a fire-breathing dragon or something. Like, it sounds weird. But anyway, so I have to look into that some more. But I guess that's what it is. So they have the exact same genes because they come from, but once they start to split, as soon as that starts, and the further apart they are all the time, the more their DNA can mutate and change along the way. I guess that makes sense. All right, well, that was a weird one. I know. Strange. Well, thanks for watching. And I'll talk to you soon. I just can't make this stuff do anything I want it. I'm not good enough with this.